You'll never take me alive! Oh, greetings, my fellow knights. This is Sir Delonius. This isn't what it looks like. I can't believe I actually grew up with this game. Ever heard of the company 3DO? You know, the company that partnered with Panasonic to make a game console back in 1993, but it ended up failing because the console was overpriced at $700 and had almost no games, except freaking Gex. Imagine pulling out a mortgage just to purchase a console that no one else had or even wanted. You know, that's the price, with inflation, of buying a scalped RTX 3080 graphics card nowadays. Freaking yikes. Because the Panasonic 3DO console did so poorly, 3DO decided to start making third-party games for Nintendo and Sony instead. And look at where that got them. What, do you think they're still around? No, newsflash, they actually filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in 2003. Why do you think we haven't seen anything from them in the past few years? 3DO fetching died. On the subject of their third-party games, while they made them, one of the games was simply called Army Men. You know the little toy soldiers that always came in buckets or bags from like the dollar store or something? Yeah, these games were based off of those. The first Army Men game was just an RTS, but people seemed to enjoy it, so they made, holy crap, there's so many games. This is actually the reason 3DO went bankrupt in the first place. It's due to how many fetching games they put out in such a short amount of time. Oversaturation of a game series is almost never a good thing, to be honest. It makes people sick and tired of pretty much the same thing over and over again. Why do you think almost no one cares about the FIFA games EA puts out each year? Because it's the same dang thing every time. Okay, maybe they're a little different, but it's mostly player changes. Other than that, I think that's it. That's where we get into today's game review selection. 3DO's Army Men Sarge's Heroes for the PlayStation 1, Nintendo 64, and Sega Dreamcast. I only have the PS1 and Nintendo 64 versions, as of course I don't own a Dreamcast. Today I'll be discussing the game's story, gameplay, soundtrack, and differences between versions, and fun or stupid quirks about the game. There were actually 3 games in this series, which some people I don't think have realized. There was a Sarge's Heroes 3, but it's also known as Sarge's War, which released on the GameCube and PS2 and Xbox. But that's enough about that. Without further ado, let's get into it. In this game, it's classic Tan Army versus Green Army, and you play as the Green Army. Specifically, you play as Colonel Grimm's best soldier, Sergeant Hawk, or just Sarge for short. Colonel Grimm is pretty much the leader of the Green Army, while Sarge and his gang of soldiers, known as the Bravo Company, are Grimm's main men. Oh, and then his daughter Vicky is the only one who's not fully green for some dumb reason.
Oh, hello Vicky.
Oh, and Sarge is a simp too. So the Green Army wakes up one morning to a surprise attack from the Tan Army, whose leader is this fat man named General Plastro. Gotta say, that's a pretty clever name to be honest. Another interesting thing I didn't know until actually recently, Sarge, Colonel Grimm, and Plastro are all voiced by the same guy. And that man is none other than Jim Cummings of all people. You know, Jim Cummings, the guy who voiced Winnie the Pooh, Tigger, Pete, and many other Disney characters from cartoons. Yeah, that Jim Cummings. Back to the story, while the Tan Army is attacking the Green Base, Sarge wakes up to an explosion next to his cabin. He quickly goes to the phone to dial the Colonel to find out what the heck is going on. Colonel Grimm then tells him about the attack and that he's by the bridge and needs his help. Sarge, while making his way out and taking out some Tan guys, he goes to help the Colonel. When you get to Colonel Grimm at the bridge, he tells you that the Bravo Company has been captured and that you need to help them. Ugh, fine! But before you do any of that, Grimm sends you after a blue spy, as they have information about the Tan Army that would aid the Green Army in the ongoing war.
Hundreds of our courageous soldiers, dead from Plastro's new super weapon, a death ray. That monster.
So originally I was going to make a joke about how the super weapon is literally a magnifying glass, but because life is hilarious and I don't own one, I just decided to hold up my glasses as the joke. You're welcome, internet. After getting the info that General Plastro's super weapon is literally a magnifying glass, and that the Tan Army are using portals to come into our world, the human world, that's when you start going on missions to start rescuing the Bravo Company members. Problem is, while doing so, Vicky gets captured in the process, so you gotta save her too. Wow, Sarge has gotta save everybody. At this rate, he's gonna save Plastro too. that couldn't happen. Sarge, after saving the Bravo Company and off to save Vicky, it looks like she betrayed the Green Army, but because she's a sneaky witchy poo, she was only doing it to get more information on the Tans' base and attacks to send back to the Greens. Can't believe Plastro didn't notice until the Tans got attacked the night before the Tans planned on attacking. He's a big dum-dum. Going through the motions and destroying the portals, that's when you get to the kitchen where Vicky is being held captive. Honestly, the levels where you're in a giant house are the ones I enjoyed more personally, because I feel like that's where the developers were able to get more creative, and it's pretty cool. The levels in the plastic world, the world where the army men come from, are fine, but I personally love the giant room levels more. Finally, after saving Vicky, Sarge tells her where to go, and he finds the living room, where the rest of the Tammy are, as well as some Christmas decorations. Obviously, this level's one of the last ones, and it's a pretty long level too. It's also cool. I love how the music for the level is literally a mix of a bunch of Christmas carols, just tuned to sound more like military music. It's unique. Finally, after beating Plastro as the family dog takes him away like the toy he is, the final level is just escaping the house to go back home. And boy is it hard! Right before you reach the last portal to get home, there's a buttload of tan soldiers with shotguns, flamethrowers, and there's even some robot toys that have flamethrowers attached to them, with a robot that has a bazooka. It's insane! Of course, after defeating all that, you're about to escape back home when Plastro, all beaten up, tries to keep you there as the portal's about to blow up. But nah, it's fine, the dog takes him again as you escape. There is an after scene where it shows Plastro in the dog's house with one last portal sitting there though. Lastly, there is some bloopers you can unlock depending on the difficulty you played the game on. But here's the thing. This game is surprisingly hard. I am not kidding. I normally don't play games on the easiest difficulty because it makes me look like a wimp. But because of how many times I died just playing on normal, I ended up switching to easy, but still died a lot. This game is hard. I can't imagine playing through hard mode, jeez. Moving along, let's talk about the gameplay and the differences between the versions. The PS1 version of this game controls pretty well, but could probably use some refining. For example, tank controls? Really? This game does have analog stick compatibility, but don't expect it to be the best. The game was more or less designed for the D-pad. You move Sarge with the D-pad, or left control stick. Up to move him forward, left and right to make him look left and right, and down to move him back. You use the X button to shoot, the square button to crawl or duck down, the triangle to jump, and the circle button to change your weapon. L1 quickly turns you around, R1 lets you aim in first person, L2 and R2 just strafe left and right. The N64 version, on the other hand, I feel has more refined controls. Although it's not by much, you're still sort of using tank controls. While playing the Nintendo 64 version, I used the Retrobit Tribute 64 controller since it's way more comfortable than this piece of junk. But I still think the original controller is fine. I just prefer the Tribute 64 if I'm gonna be playing on the Nintendo 64. The controls for the Nintendo 64 version are the control stick for moving, A to jump, B to switch weapons, C down to kneel or duck, C left to dive roll, C right to strafe depending on your control stick's position, C up for toggling the camera's view, L for changing the map's view, R for the first person aim, and Z to shoot your gun. I say, gameplay-wise, the Nintendo 64 version is leagues better. It just feels more streamlined and just works better most of the time. The problem is, I found the Nintendo 64 version to be a little harder difficulty-wise compared to the PS1 version, even on the easiest setting. Another difference between versions is the look of each stage. They are surprisingly different most of the time. Just look at the difference between the garden level in both games. Here is something the N64 version took a hit on though, and that's the sounds and music. The music just sounds muffled while on the Nintendo 64 version. The PlayStation version of the soundtrack just sounds more natural. And for that, the PlayStation 1 version gets the point in that department. But speaking of music, let's talk about the soundtrack for a bit. Holy crap, for what would look like a subpar game to most people, this music freaking slaps hard. The music in this game is so catchy and fits so well with the gameplay. The music gets an 8 out of 10 from me. Some songs are a little weird, but overall, the soundtrack is awesome. On the other hand though, the N64 version of the music isn't as clear and doesn't have the background instruments that the PS1 version has. So the N64 version gets lowered to about a 7. Not bad still, not as good as the PlayStation. So overall, what are my thoughts on this game? Army Men Sarge's Heroes is a pretty darn fun game. If you can track down a copy, I totally recommend it. The gameplay, while it can be pretty difficult sometimes, still kept me invested, and I loved how creative it can get sometimes. Which version would I recommend though? Honestly, despite it missing the cutscenes and the slightly worse sounding music, I'd still recommend the N64 version. It just felt like the overall better package. If you currently don't have a Nintendo 64 though, at this rate they're going for over hundreds of dollars, so I can understand. But if you have a PS1, PS2, or backwards compatible PS3, or if you have a PSP, they can still get it on the store. I don't know if it's still open. I'd say PS1 version. But hey, if you do, you get the cutscenes and the better sounding music. I'd rate this game a 7 out of 10 no matter what version you have. It's fun and has a pretty creative premise, but there's definitely some crap holding it back from greatness. But hey, at least they made Sarge's Heroes 2. Let's see how they improved with the 2 years they had to develop this game. Thank you all so much for watching. I deeply appreciate it. I'm deeply sorry for the long wait. I again have just been swamped with college work, and I've also been playing a ton of Spectro VR, which reminds me a lot of Luigi's Mansion, and I hope to actually review that game someday. But until next time, slay your dragons.